Some stories feel like they were ripped straight out of a spy novel. This is one of them. We're diving into the mystery of a man who pulled off one of the boldest heists in history and then just vanished. It's a case that has stumped everyone for over 50 years. So let's get right into it.
I mean, it sounds like a Hollywood movie plot, right? But this actually happened. A guy commits what a lot of people call the perfect crime and then disappears into thin air. So the big question is, how on earth did he do it? And maybe even more importantly, did he actually get away with it?
So where does a story like this even begin? Well, it all started on what was supposed to be a totally routine 30-minute flight. And on that flight was a man who, at first glance, was completely and utterly unremarkable. Picture this. It's November 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving. A man, looking sharp in a business suit, takes his seat near the back of the plane. He's calm, he's quiet, he just blends right in. Nobody had any idea what was about to happen. His composure was just chilling. He passed a note to a flight attendant. And at first, she actually thought he was just trying to give her his phone number, so she just slipped it in her pocket. But then he leaned in and calmly said, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." And his demands were weirdly specific. He didn't just want the cash, he wanted 4 parachutes, 2 main chutes and 2 reserve chutes, and a fuel truck ready to go the second they landed in Seattle. I mean, faced with a bomb on a plane, the airline president really only had one choice: give the man exactly what he asked for. Okay, so he's got what he wants, the cash, the parachutes. Now comes the truly insane part of his plan, an escape that, by all logic, should have been a suicide mission. The precision of his plan was just remarkable. As soon as they hit the ground in Seattle, he traded all 36 passengers for the money and the chutes. Then he tells the pilots to take off again, but this time to fly low and slow. And then, at exactly 8:13 p.m., a warning light flashes in the cockpit. The rear staircase had been lowered. Dan Cooper was gone. And he jumped into conditions that were just unimaginable. We're talking a wind chill of minus 57 degrees Celsius at 10,000 feet, all while wearing nothing more than a business suit. So, this is the question that has haunted this case for decades. Seriously, could anyone survive that? A jump into a crazy storm in the middle of the night over a remote, rugged forest. The FBI, for their part, was pretty convinced the answer was a hard no. What happened next was one of the biggest, most expensive manhunts in American history. It was a massive, desperate search for a man who seemed to have been completely swallowed by the night. And right from the start, they weren't really looking for a man. They were looking for a body. I mean, think about it. He's weighed down by 10 kilos of cash, wearing just a suit, and jumping into a freezing wilderness. The odds of survival were basically zero. It just seemed impossible. But then, the story takes this really bizarre twist. Cooper's heist inspired a bunch of copycats. At least 5 other hijackers tried pretty much the same thing, and every single one of them survived the jump. This was a startling fact that forced the FBI to ask a pretty chilling question. What if Cooper survived too? For 8 long years, the case was completely cold. Nothing. The FBI had meticulously recorded the serial numbers of all 10,000 of those $20 bills. They sent the list everywhere, and yet not a single one ever turned up in circulation. It was like the money and the man just ceased to exist. And then, in 1980, out of nowhere, a breakthrough. This number, $5,800, represents the only piece of physical evidence from the crime that has ever been recovered. An 8-year-old kid, just playing on the bank of the Columbia River, stumbles across these 3 rotting bundles of cash. And when they checked the serial numbers, it was a perfect match. But instead of solving the mystery, this just made things weirder. How did the money get there? And where was the rest of it? The discovery of the money definitely breathed new life into the case, but it didn't get them any closer to a suspect. No, what it did was help turn this whole thing into a modern-day legend. And get this, part of that legend is that even the name we all know him by is completely wrong. The hijacker told everyone his name was Dan Cooper, but a reporter on a tight deadline misheard it as D.B. Cooper. And because of this thing called the anchoring effect, where our brains latch on to the first piece of info we get, that mistake stuck. It's the name that went down in history. So the FBI investigated over 800 suspects, but it really boiled down to a couple of main guys.
First, there was Richard McCoy, who pulled off a nearly identical hijacking just a few months later, but he had an airtight alibi. Then there was Robert Rackstrom, a Vietnam vet who looked a lot like the sketch. But in the end, there just wasn't enough solid evidence to pin it on him. So, after nearly half a century of dead ends, false leads, and just nothing, the FBI officially suspended the case in 2016. They decided their resources were better spent elsewhere. The ghost had, for all intents and purposes, won. So in the end, what are we left with? After more than 50 years, all that remains is this sketch, a few handfuls of rotted $20 bills, and a question that's just as fascinating today as it was in 1971. Was he some master skydiver or just a desperate guy who got incredibly lucky? Did he die out there in the wilderness, or did he live out the rest of his life on his stolen cash? Who was D.B. Cooper?